Abigail Carter threw the letter into the tracks. Not gently, not with hesitation. She crumpled it, first crushed it in both hands until her knuckles went white, and then she threw it as hard as she could toward the iron rails below the platform, watching it tumble and catch the October wind and vanish beneath the cold gray sky of Red Creek, Wyoming. 3 days. She had waited 3 days on that platform. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far these stories are traveling. Now let's get back to Abigail. She had arrived on a Tuesday morning, wearing her best dress, the one with the ivory collar she'd hemmed herself by lamplight the night before leaving Columbus. She had carried one trunk, one hat box, and a small leather purse containing $41.30, every penny she'd saved over 2 years of working as a bookkeeper at Hartwell & Sons Dry Goods. She had carried those letters too. 14 of them tied with a length of blue ribbon her mother had pressed into her palm at the station back in Ohio. "Write me when you arrive," her mother had said, gripping her hand a moment too long. "Write me the moment you see him." The man's name was supposed to be Douglas Farnwell. Rancher, widower, 38 years old. He had written to her every 2 weeks for 11 months through the correspondence agency in Cincinnati, and his letters were kind, careful, and unhurried, the kind of letters a man writes when he is genuinely trying to say something true. He wrote about his cattle and his land, and the way Red Creek looked in winter, when the creek froze and the whole valley went quiet. He had never once pressured her. He had simply asked in letter after letter whether she might consider building something real with a man who was willing to try. She had considered it for 8 months. Then she had written back, yes. She had sold her furniture. She had given notice at Hartwell & Sons. She had said goodbye to the apartment on Maple Street where she had lived alone since her father passed 4 years before. She had packed her entire life into one trunk and one hat box, and stepped onto a westbound train with the absolute conviction that she was walking toward something better. She had been wrong. Douglas Farnwell did not exist. She understood this fully by the second evening, when the station master, a heavy-set man named Gerald Potts, who wore his mustache too long and his sympathy too short, leaned against his office door and studied her with the careful expression of a man deciding how much to say. "Miss Carter." He cleared his throat. "You wouldn't be the first, I'm afraid." "The first what?" she said. "The first woman left waiting on this platform." He removed his cap and turned it in his hands. "There's been a scheme running out of Kansas City for the better part of 3 years now. Fellow names himself different things in different counties. Takes the agency fees. Writes the letters. Never shows. By the time the women figure it out, he's already moved on to the next territory." Abigail had stood very still while he said this. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She had simply stood there with her trunk beside her and her hat box balanced on top of it, and her $41.30 folded in her purse, doing the arithmetic in her head that she already knew the answer to. Round-trip fare $44. She was $3 short of going home. "Is there anything I can do for you, Miss Carter?" Gerald Potts asked. "No," she said quietly. "Thank you." She went back to the bench at the far end of the platform and sat down and looked at the tracks. That was Tuesday evening. Wednesday came. The morning freight passed through at 6. The passenger train from Cheyenne arrived at 11 and departed at 11:40. A cattle car came through in the afternoon, slow and heavy, and the smell of it settled over the platform like something final. Nobody came for her. Thursday. She watched a family arrive on the noon train, a husband and wife and 3 children, the smallest one asleep against the mother's shoulder, the older 2 running ahead to greet an old man who stood waiting with his hat in his hands and tears already running down his face before they reached him. The old man gathered all 3 children into his arms and laughed the kind of laugh that sounds exactly like crying, and the mother watched and pressed her hand over her mouth, and the husband put his arm around the old man's shoulders, and they stood there together on the platform in a tangle of arms and voices and belonging. Abigail looked away. Thursday evening she counted her money again. $41.30. She had eaten only what the station master's wife had brought her, a tin plate of beans each evening, delivered without being asked, without any comment, just sat quietly beside her on the bench. She had not spent a penny. She had $41.30, and she needed 44, and there was nothing in Red Creek that a woman with her particular skills could earn in a single day, and she knew it. Friday morning, she made a decision. She would take the afternoon train east as far east as $41.30 would carry her, and she would find work wherever she landed, and she would write to her mother and explain that she had made a terrible mistake, and she would begin again from nothing, and she would never, not once in the rest of her life, answer another letter from a correspondence agency. She was standing beside her trunk, waiting for Gerald Potts to help her carry it to the loading platform when she heard the footsteps. Small footsteps. Quick and slightly uneven, the way a child walks when they are trying to be faster than their legs naturally go. Then a voice. "Excuse me, ma'am." Abigail turned. The girl was small, for 9 thin arms, sharp elbows, a pair of boots at least one size too large for her feet. Her dress had been mended at the hem and mended again, and the second mending was already coming loose at one corner. She was carrying the basket with both hands, and inside the basket were 6 eggs nested in a fold of cloth, and she was holding it with the particular careful concentration of a child who has been entrusted with something breakable and takes that responsibility seriously. Her hair was the color of creek water in autumn brown and amber mixed together, and it had been braided this morning. Abigail could tell, but the braid had begun working itself loose, and several strands had escaped to fall across the girl's face, and the girl had no free hand to push them back, so she simply looked out from behind the loose hair with a pair of blue eyes that were completely, startlingly direct. "Are you the lady who's been waiting?" the girl asked. "I beg your pardon. On the platform. People in town said there's a lady been waiting 3 days for a man who didn't come." The blue eyes moved over Abigail with frank assessment. "Mr. Potts said you're leaving today." "That's right," Abigail said. The girl was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her eggs, then back up. "Would you marry my cowboy daddy instead?" The words landed so completely without preamble that Abigail actually took a small step backward. "I what? My daddy," the girl said patiently, as though Abigail might simply be hard of hearing. "His name is Ethan Brooks. He has a cattle ranch about 4 miles north of town. My name is Lily. My mama died when I was 6, and Daddy's been trying to run the ranch alone ever since. But the books are all wrong, and the contracts are bad, and I've been trying to fix them, but I'm only 9, and I don't know enough yet. And last week I heard Daddy tell Hank. Hank is the foreman. I heard him say that if something doesn't change by spring, we'll lose the whole property." She delivered all of this as a single carefully assembled report, the way a child delivers something they have been rehearsing. Then she added, "I heard in town that you know how to do books." Abigail stared at her. "Lily," she said carefully, "does your father know you're here?" A brief pause. "He knows I came to town for eggs." "That is not what I asked." Lily looked down at her basket. "No, ma'am. He doesn't know I'm here for this particular thing. You came to the train station to find a bride for your father." "Not exactly a bride," Lily said quickly. "He'd never agree to that. He says he doesn't need any help." She glanced up. "That's not true. He needs a lot of help, but he won't ask for it, so I'm asking for it instead." Abigail was quiet for a long moment. She looked out at the tracks. She looked at the empty platform and the empty bench and the little pile of belongings she had built her entire future upon. And she thought about the train that was coming in 2 hours and the unknown town it would deliver her to, and the unknown work she would have to find there, and she thought about $41.30 against a world that had already taken everything she'd offered at once and left her standing on a platform in Wyoming. Then she looked at Lily Brooks, who was watching her with those completely direct blue eyes, holding a basket of 6 eggs with both hands waiting. "How old did you say you are?" Abigail asked. 9. "And you rode into town alone to do this?" "I walk fast," Lily said simply. Something caught in Abigail's chest. Not pity exactly. Something more complicated than pity. Something that recognized in this child's quiet, impossible practicality a quality she understood from the inside. "I won't marry a man I've never met," Abigail said. "I want to be very clear about that." "That's fine," Lily said. "He won't want to marry you either. Not yet. She seemed to find this perfectly reasonable. But you could come and stay a while. Daddy would pay you. He's not a man who doesn't pay what he owes. That's part of the problem. Actually, the buyers are cheating him, but he won't see it because he trusts a handshake, and you can't run a cattle operation on handshakes anymore. Everybody knows that. Your father, Abigail said slowly, would hire a woman he has never met, based on the word of his 9-year-old daughter, to manage his ranch finances. Lily considered this with the serious expression of someone calculating odds. He might need a little convincing, she admitted, despite everything. Despite 3 days of humiliation and a borrowed tin plate of beans, and a future that had just evaporated entirely. Abigail felt the smallest thing move through her. Not hope exactly, more like the memory of what hope felt like surfacing briefly before she could stop it. "If I come with you," she said, "and your father refuses, I need him to buy my train ticket back to the station, wherever I can afford to go." "That's fair," Lily said immediately. "And I'm not there as a bride. I'm there as a bookkeeper. That's the only thing I'm agreeing to." "Yes, ma'am. And I want to see the books before I agree to anything else. If the situation is more than I can address, I will say so honestly, and I will leave." "Yes, ma'am." Lily was nodding steadily at each condition, as though checking them off an internal list. "All right," Abigail said. She picked up her hat box. She looked at Gerald Potts, who had been standing in his office doorway for the last 5 minutes with his cap in his hands and a complicated expression on his face. "I won't need help with the trunk after all, Mr. Potts," she said. Gerald Potts looked at Lily, then at Abigail, then at the basket of eggs, and something shifted in his expression that Abigail couldn't quite name. "Miss Carter," he said. "The Brooks place is— Ethan Brooks is a decent man. He's had a hard time of it since Eleanor passed. He's too proud for his own good sometimes, and he works himself half to death, and he doesn't always see when someone's taking advantage." He paused. "But he's decent." "Thank you, Mr. Potts. You need anything at all, you send word." She nodded and picked up one side of the trunk and looked at Lily. "Lead the way," she said. Lily Brooks turned on her heel and walked, and the loose end of her re-hemmed dress swept the platform planks and the eggs rode careful and safe in their basket, and Abigail Carter picked up the other end of her own trunk and followed a 9-year-old girl out of the Red Creek train station and into whatever came next. The wagon was a 1/4 mile down the main road, hitched to a brown mare that stood patient and still beside the water trough outside Hannigan's general store. The wagon itself was old, but well kept the wood dry, and sound the wheels recently refitted the hardware clean. Whatever else was failing at the Brooks Ranch, someone there still took proper care of the equipment. "Can you drive a wagon?" Lily asked. "Yes." "Good. I'm not supposed to on the main road." She handed the reins to Abigail without ceremony and climbed up onto the bench. "It's straight north. You'll see the gate. It has a B worked into the iron." They drove in silence for a while. The October road was hard-packed and dry, the cottonwoods along the creek showing their last gold, and the mountains beyond, still distant, were a line of early snow across their peaks like a hem. The sky was the particular color of October sky on the high plains, a blue so clear and cold it looked breakable. "What was she like?" Abigail asked after a while. "Your mother." Lily didn't answer immediately. She looked at the road ahead. "She smelled like bread," she said finally, "and she sang when she was hanging washing. Not pretty singing. Daddy always said she couldn't carry a tune, but she sang anyway." A pause. "She said the cattle liked it." Abigail kept her eyes on the road. "She sounds like she was wonderful," she said. "She was," Lily said with simple, absolute certainty. They didn't speak again until the iron gate appeared, and Abigail guided the mare through it, and the road bent around a stand of cottonwood, and the ranch came into view. The house was solid 2 stories, stone foundation, good bones. The barn behind it was larger, also sound, though one of the fence sections along the near pasture needed work. There were cattle visible in the far field, a decent number well-fleshed for October. 3 horses in the near corral. A bunkhouse to the left of the barn, smoke coming from its chimney. And standing in the yard between the house and barn, arms crossed, watching the wagon come through the gate with an expression of complete and total bafflement, was a man. How was tall? Not dramatically so, but the kind of tall that becomes apparent when you see it working. When the height is all in the back and shoulders of someone who has spent years doing physical labor that required them. He was wearing a canvas work coat and a hat that had been rained on enough times to hold its shape permanently in the manner of hats that have genuinely been used. His jaw was set in the particular way of a jaw that sets itself when the mind is working hard to remain calm. Howe was looking at Lily. Then he looked at Abigail. Then he looked at the trunk loaded in the back of his own wagon. "Lily Mae Brooks," he said. His voice was quiet. That specific quiet that is not soft, but controlled, the quiet of a man who has learned to hold things in rather than let them out. "Daddy." Lily's voice was equally composed. "Would you like to explain," he said, "who this is and why our wagon is carrying what appears to be a full trunk of someone else's belongings?" "This is Miss Abigail Carter," Lily said. "She's a bookkeeper. She's from Ohio. She knows double-entry accounting and contract law, and she read a legal notice that cost Henderson's Mill $40,000 in penalties because of an error in a timber contract, and I think she can fix our books." Silence. Ethan Brooks looked at his daughter for a long, careful moment. Then he moved his gaze to Abigail. His eyes were gray-green, and they were not unkind, but they were not open either. They were the eyes of a man who had learned to keep careful track of what he trusted and what he didn't. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Brooks. I apologize for whatever my daughter has told you about the state of this ranch." "She told me the truth," Abigail said. "As far as I can tell." Howe was quiet a moment. "You don't know anything about this ranch." "That's correct. I know what a 9-year-old chose to tell me in approximately 6 minutes on a train platform, which was enough to make me willing to drive 4 miles before forming an opinion." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Brooks. I'm asking you to let me look at your ledgers. If what I find confirms what your daughter described, I'll tell you what I can do about it. If it doesn't, I'll tell you that too, and I'll ask you for the price of a train ticket to Cheyenne." He studied her. "You've been waiting at that station," he said. It wasn't quite a question. 3 days, she said. "The man I was supposed to marry doesn't exist. The correspondence was a scheme. I have $41 to my name, and I need 44 to get back east, so you'll understand that I am not here because I had an excess of options." She kept her voice level. "I am here because your daughter has better instincts than most adults I've met, and because if what she described is accurate, I can help you, and you can pay me fairly for that help. And that is a business arrangement that doesn't require us to trust each other at all." Ethan Brooks was quiet for a long time. A cowhand appeared in the bunkhouse doorway, watched for a moment, and disappeared again. Behind the house, a crow made 3 sharp sounds and went silent. "Hank," Ethan said without raising his voice. "From somewhere near the barn." "Yeah, boss." "Carry Miss Carter's trunk to the guest room." Silence from the direction of the barn. Then footsteps. Ethan looked at Lily. His expression was impossible to read, not angry exactly, but not comfortable either, something in between. "We'll talk later," he said to her. "Yes, Daddy," she said with the manner of someone who has already calculated this particular cost and found it acceptable. He looked at Abigail one more time. "I'll have Martha show you the books after supper." He paused. "We eat at 6. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." He turned and walked back toward the barn without another word. The canvas coat moving with the particular unhurried authority of a man on his own land, and Abigail watched him go, and thought proud yes, and scared though he would never in this life say so, and tired not physically, or not only physically tired in the way that comes from carrying something alone for too long. She recognized all 3. The guest room was small and clean. A bed with a proper mattress, a washstand, a window that looked out over the near pasture. The curtains had been made by someone who knew how to sew double-hemmed with a small embroidered border along the bottom, and they were faded now from sun, but the work in them was still visible, and Abigail understood without being told that Eleanor Brooks had made these curtains, and that Ethan had not taken them down. Hank, a raw-boned man in his 40s with a permanent squint and hands that looked capable of almost anything, set her trunk at the foot of the bed without speaking, then stood in the doorway a moment. "She your daughter?" he asked finally. No, Abigail said. She's Mr. Brooks's daughter. I know whose daughter she is. He studied Abigail with the squint. I meant, did she talk you into this? She presented a logical case, Abigail said. I evaluated it and made a decision. Hank was quiet for a moment. She do that a lot, he said finally. Present logical cases. Girl's been keeping the household accounts since she was 7. Found a billing error with the feed supplier that saved us $60 last spring. He paused. Ethan doesn't know about the $60. Abigail looked at him. Why not? Because then he'd have to admit she's been doing a grown woman's job since before she lost her first tooth, and that would pain him considerably. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the washstand. He's a good man, Miss Carter. He lost a lot when he lost Eleanor, and some of it he ain't found his way back to yet. He left. Abigail sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the faded curtains. She thought about Eleanor Brooks, who had made these curtains and sung off key to the cattle and smelled like bread, and raised a daughter who walked 4 miles alone to find help for a father who didn't know how to ask for it. She thought about Ethan Brooks standing in the yard with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his eyes doing that careful accounting of what he trusted and what he didn't. She thought about Lily sitting beside her on the wagon bench, saying, she sang anyway. Daddy always said she couldn't carry a tune, but she sang anyway. Then she got up, opened her trunk, hung her second-best dress in the wardrobe, and went downstairs to find the books. Martha was the housekeeper. A small, round-faced woman with iron-gray hair and the efficient manner of someone who has kept a household running through multiple varieties of difficulty and intends to keep doing so. She produced the ledgers from a cabinet in the study with no ceremony and no comment, simply set them on the desk, lit the lamp, and left. Abigail opened the first one. By the time supper was called, she had worked through 4 years of accounts, and her initial assessment, formed quietly, carefully, without drama, was that the situation was worse than Lily had described, and more complex, and not at all unfixable, but would require time and precision, and the kind of careful, methodical work that she had spent 2 years doing at Hartwell & Sons, and had believed until this week was behind her. She closed the ledger and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the cover. Then she washed her hands and went to the dining room. Ethan was already seated. Lily was beside him watching the doorway. Martha came and went with dishes, and a young cowhand named Billy sat at the far end and kept his eyes on his plate with the discipline of someone who had been told probably more than once not to stare at the guest. How bad is it? Ethan asked before she had entirely settled into her chair. Direct. She filed that away. It's significant, she said. The core problem isn't mismanagement on your part. It's a series of contracts that were written to disadvantage you and a tax assessment that I believe was deliberately miscalculated. She paused. Someone has been systematically taking advantage of the fact that you run this operation on trust and handshakes. His jaw tightened. Who? He said. I'm not certain yet. I need 2 more days with the records, and I want to look at the original contracts before I name anyone. But you think you can fix it? I think it can be fixed, she said. I don't promise what I can't control, but the underlying situation, the debt structure, the tax problem, the contract terms, all of it is addressable. It'll take work, and it may require legal intervention, but there's no point that appears unrecoverable. Ethan was quiet. Lily across the table was watching him with the focused attention of a small person who has learned to read an adult's silence very carefully. 2 more days, he said finally. Yes. And after that, I'll give you a full assessment and a recommended course of action, and you'll decide whether you want my help to execute it or whether you'd rather handle it yourself. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork. Martha, he said, raising his voice slightly, add a place setting for Miss Carter to the regular rotation. From the kitchen. Already done it. The corner of Lily's mouth moved in a way that was almost but not quite a smile. Abigail looked at her plate. The food was good, a proper beef stew, cornbread, something apple-based that she could smell from the kitchen. She had not eaten a full meal in 3 days, and her hands were not entirely steady, though she kept them flat and still on the table. "Miss Carter," Ethan said, not looking up from his plate. "Yes." "What the man did the fellow who ran the scheme." He paused. "You didn't deserve that." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she agreed. "I didn't." He nodded once and returned to his food. Lily looked from her father to Abigail and back to her father, and something in her expression settled something that had been held at tension, releasing slightly like a rope, given just enough slack. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods at the edge of the yard. The lamp above the table threw its circle of steady gold light, and Abigail Carter, who had thrown a letter into the train tracks that morning with both hands, who had arrived 3 days ago, expecting a life, and been handed nothing, who had followed a 9-year-old girl 4 miles down a Wyoming road, because there was simply nowhere else left to go, sat at a stranger's table in a stranger's house, and ate her first real meal in 3 days, and did not allow herself to think about what any of it meant. Not yet. There was work to do first. There was always, in her experience, work to do first. The lamp burned late that night in the study of the Brooks Ranch, and at the desk beneath it, Abigail Carter worked through the books, page by page and column by column, building the case for a family that didn't yet know she was fighting for them. The lamp in the study burned past midnight. Abigail didn't notice the time until the oil ran low and the flame began to gutter, throwing uneven shadows across the columns she'd been tallying. She trimmed the wick, added the last of the oil from the small reserve jug on the shelf, and kept working. By the time the flame steadied again, she had filled 6 pages of her own notepaper with figures, cross-references, and questions. The kind of questions that don't announce themselves loudly, but sit quietly at the edge of a ledger entry, waiting for someone patient enough to notice them. She noticed everything. That was both her gift and the thing that had made her previous employer nervous, the way she could hold a column of numbers in her mind and feel when something didn't balance, the way a wrong entry had a texture to it, almost physical, like a splinter beneath the surface of smooth wood. You ran your hand along and something caught. The Brooks Ranch books were full of splinters. She set down her pen and pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. The house was completely silent around her. She had heard Lily go to bed at 8:30. Small footsteps overhead, the particular pattern of a child who tries to walk quietly and doesn't entirely succeed. She had heard Ethan come in from the barn sometime around 10, heard his boots on the entry floor, heard him pause outside the study door for a moment. Just a pause, not long, just long enough that she'd known he was there, and then heard him continue up the stairs without knocking. She had kept working. Now she sat back and looked at what she'd assembled. The picture was worse than significant. It was methodical. That was the word that kept surfacing in her mind as she worked through year after year of entries. Methodical. Someone, or more likely, several someones working in coordination, had been applying systematic pressure to the Brooks Ranch finances from at least 3 different directions simultaneously over a period of not less than 4 years. It was not the work of opportunists. It was the work of people with a plan. The cattle contracts first. She had found 6 agreements with a broker named Harlan Goss out of Cheyenne, each one written with the standard language a rancher would recognize and trust, and each one containing a single clause buried differently, each time worded slightly differently, each time but functionally identical, that allowed the buyer to renegotiate the price per head within 30 days of delivery based on market adjustment as determined by the buyer's assessment. Not a third party, not a market index, the buyer's own assessment. Ethan had signed every one. She had no doubt he'd read them. She equally had no doubt he hadn't recognized what that clause meant in practice, because it was written in the kind of language that sounds like standard protection and functions as the opposite. The tax records were worse. The county assessment on the Brooks property had been recalculated twice in 4 years, both times upward, both times citing a provision in the Wyoming territorial statute that, and this was the part that had made her sit very still, for a long moment, she was reasonably certain, had been repealed in 1885. The assessment officer's name appeared on both documents, a man named Clifford Renner. She wrote the name down separately and underlined it. The third direction was the subtlest and, to her mind, the most deliberate. Over the past 2 years, 3 of the Brooks Ranch's neighboring properties had changed hands. Not through foreclosure, through what appeared to be voluntary sale in each case, at prices that were reasonable enough to not attract immediate attention. The buyers were listed as different individuals on each deed, but 2 of the names shared an address in the filing records. Not the same address, but addresses on the same street in Denver. Abigail had no way to confirm a connection from here, but the coincidence had a texture to it. She knew what it meant when the land around a particular property began changing hands quietly and systematically. Someone wanted the Brooks Ranch, and they had been patient about it. She closed the last ledger and sat for a long moment in the guttering lamplight. Then she thought about Ethan Brooks pausing outside the study door at 10 o'clock, deciding whether to knock and not knocking. She thought about Lily, 9 years old, keeping the household accounts since she was 7, finding billing errors that saved $60 that she never told her father about, because she understood with the instincts of a child who has had to grow up faster than any child should, exactly what it would cost him to know. She put the ledgers back in order, stacked her notes precisely, and went to bed. In the morning, Ethan was already at the table when she came down. He had a cup of coffee in front of him and a piece of paper that he turned face down when she entered, not quickly enough to be subtle about it. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Brooks." She sat and accepted the coffee Martha put in front of her without being asked. "Thank you." Lily came down 2 minutes later, ate half a piece of cornbread standing up, and announced she had to check the henhouse. "Sit down and finish your breakfast," Ethan said. "The eggs? We'll still be there in 10 minutes. Sit." Lily sat. She looked at Abigail. Abigail looked at her coffee. "I'd like to talk to you this morning," Abigail said to Ethan. "About the books, when you have time." "I have time now." "After Lily goes to school," she said. A pause. Lily's expression didn't change, but Abigail saw the small shift in her posture, the recognition that she was being excluded from a conversation about her own family's survival, and the decision made quickly and without complaint to accept it. That cost the child something. Abigail filed it away. "Fine," Ethan said. Lily finished her cornbread, fetched her school books from the shelf by the door, and paused on her way out. "Miss Carter," she said. "Yes. The feed supplier contract, the one renewed last April. Daddy signed it before I could look at it." Ethan's expression tightened. "Lily." "It's in the bottom drawer on the left side," she said without looking at him. "Separate from the others." Then she went out. The silence she left behind had a particular quality. "She keeps a separate filing system," Ethan said finally. His voice was quiet, and something in it was not quite steady. I know, Abigail said. "I found it last night." He looked at the tabletop. "She's 9 years old," he said. It was not said with anger. It was said with the particular weight of a statement that is also an accusation directed entirely inward. "I know," Abigail said again more gently. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed back his chair. "Come to the study." She followed him. He closed the door behind them and stood with his arms crossed while she laid out her notes on the desk, organized, clear, no unnecessary language, just the structure of what she had found and what it indicated. She talked for 20 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she began wondering if she had misjudged him, if the controlled surface concealed something less steady underneath. Then he uncrossed his arms. "Harlan Goss," he said. "Yes." "I've known Harlan Goss for 8 years. He came to Eleanor's funeral." "I know," she said. "That's consistent with what I found. This wasn't opportunistic, Mr. Brooks. Someone cultivated your trust over a period of years before the pressure began. That's," she chose the word carefully, "deliberate." His jaw set in the way she had already come to recognize. "Clifford Renner," he said. "The tax assessor." "Yes." "He's on the town council. I assumed he held some kind of position." She paused. "The tax assessment issue is potentially the cleanest to address. The statute he cited was repealed, and if that can be documented, and I believe it can, through the territorial records in Cheyenne, the excess assessment is recoverable." "How much?" she told him. He was very still. That's 3 years of excess payment, she said. Possibly more. That's... He stopped, picked up the figure she'd written and looked at it, set it back down. That's the note on the east pasture. That's what I borrowed against the east pasture to cover. Yes, she said. I know. He looked at her, then really looked at her. The careful accounting gaze that she'd noticed in the yard yesterday, except that now it wasn't keeping her at distance. It was trying to understand something. Why are you doing this? He said. Because you're paying me. I haven't agreed to pay you anything yet. You will, she said. Once you've decided whether the assessment I've given you is accurate. His mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. You're very certain of your work. I'm certain of these particular calculations, she said. I double-checked everything twice. I'm less certain about the Denver connection. I'll need more time with those land records, and I may need access to the county deed registry in town. But the contract issue and the tax issue, those I'm certain of. He was quiet again. Then, what do you need from me? She had the list already written. She handed it to him. He read it. His eyebrows rose slightly at one item. The original survey documents. Yes. I need to know exactly what the property lines cover, based on what I found in the neighboring deed records. I believe the interest in your property isn't primarily about the cattle or the house. He looked up. Then what? He said. I'd rather confirm before I say. But I want you to understand that what I'm describing isn't a financial problem that got out of hand. This is organized. Someone has been working toward a specific goal for years, and they've used legal and financial mechanisms because those are harder to fight than anything more direct. She met his gaze. That's actually useful information. It means the evidence exists. It means this can be countered. He looked at the list for another moment. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. I'll get you the survey documents, he said. That afternoon. Abigail rode into Red Creek with Hank, who drove and didn't speak for most of the 4 miles, which suited her perfectly. She had a list of records to request from the county clerk's office, and 2 questions she intended to ask Gerald Potts at the station, who had in her brief experience of him the particular knowledge that comes from watching a town's business move through a fixed point for many years. The county clerk was a young man named Theodore Ashe, who was helpful and slightly flustered in approximately equal measure, and who located everything she requested within 40 minutes, which was faster than she'd expected. She took careful notes and left him with a receipt for the copies she needed. Gerald Potts was leaning against the station door when she arrived as though he'd been expecting her. Miss Carter, he said. Mr. Potts, I have 2 questions. I might have 2 answers. Clifford Renner, she said. How long has he been on the town council? Gerald Potts's expression changed in a way that told her everything before he spoke. 6 years. Came up from Laramie. Nobody knew much about him, but he was well-financed and well-spoken, and the council had a vacancy. And the land sales. The McIntosh property to the west of Brooks, the Healy place to the north, who brokered those. Gerald Potts looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway. Come inside. She went in. He closed the door. Those sales were handled by a Denver land company called Western Territorial Development. He said, lowering his voice slightly, though the station was empty. I know because Ada McIntosh came to me when she got the offer wanting to know if I'd heard of them. I hadn't. I wrote to a contact in Denver. He paused. He wrote back that Western Territorial Development was 6 months old when they bought the McIntosh property and had no verifiable business history. Abigail felt the pieces settle into a pattern she'd already half-built in her mind. Who's behind it? She said. My contact couldn't get a name. The company is registered through a law firm that represents several similar entities. Whoever is doing this, they know how to keep themselves at distance. But someone local has to be coordinating, she said. Someone who knows which properties to target and in what order. Gerald Potts looked at her steadily. Clifford Renner, she said. I have no proof of that, he said carefully. Neither do I, yet. She stood up. Thank you, Mr. Potts. Miss Carter. He held the door for her. Be careful how you move on this. These are not small men. I know, she said. I'm not a small woman. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, a kind of relief, she thought, or something close to it. No, he said. I don't suppose you are. She was back at the ranch before supper. She did not tell Ethan everything she had learned in town, not yet. She needed to be certain before she put the full shape of it in front of him, because she already understood from watching him for less than 48 hours that he was a man who would act on certainty and struggle with suspicion, and she needed him careful and patient, not reactive. What she did tell him that evening in the study was that the situation involved more than one party, and that the connections were becoming clearer, and that she needed him to do one specific thing. Don't renew the Goss contract, she said. It comes up for renewal in 6 weeks. Let it lapse. He looked at her sharply. If I don't renew, I have no buyer for the spring cattle. You'll have a buyer, she said. I'm going to find you one. A legitimate one with a contract written by someone whose interests are not opposed to yours. She paused. There's a ranchers' cooperative forming in 3 counties north of here. I found correspondence about it in the county clerk's files. They're looking for established operations to partner with. The Brooks herd qualifies. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You found that in one afternoon. I know what to look for, she said simply. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of a man reassembling his understanding of something. Hank says you asked him to pull the survey documents, he said. Yes. He said you looked at them for about an hour and then asked him if he'd ever noticed any springs on the property that weren't on the original map. That's right. He said he told you about the Lower Creek source, the one on the east boundary. He did. Ethan looked at her directly. Is that what this is about? She held his gaze. I think so. Yes. He was very still. That spring, he said slowly, feeds 3 properties downstream. Has for 30 years. If someone controlled it, they'd control the water rights for a significant portion of the valley's cattle land, she said, which is worth considerably more than any individual ranch, including yours. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the silences that had come before it. This one had weight. They've been building toward owning this property, he said, not because of the cattle. Not primarily. The cattle operation is what makes the ranch viable enough to be worth pressuring financially. The water is the actual objective. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his back to her. She waited. Lily, he said finally very quietly. Yes. She found a billing error with the feed supplier. $60. He didn't turn around. She didn't tell me because she knew I'd feel guilty that she was doing the accounts. I know. She's been doing a woman's work in this house since she was 7 years old. Cooking. Accounts. Managing the household. His voice was still quiet, controlled, but something in it had changed. She walked 4 miles alone to find you. Yes. He turned around then. His face was not broken exactly, but open in a way it hadn't been before. The careful accounting look was gone, replaced by something rawer and less guarded. I told myself I was protecting her, he said. Keeping things running so she didn't have to worry. I told myself that. Mr. Brooks, she's been worrying since she was 6, he said. She's been managing my ranch while I was out there telling myself she was just a child who needed protecting. He stopped, pressed his hand against the back of the chair. I missed it completely. She's extraordinary, Abigail said. What she did, what she's been doing, that comes from love. Not from neglect on your part. It comes from both, he said without self-pity, just flatly. Let's not dress it up. She was quiet. He straightened. The open look closed again, not entirely, but enough. He was a man who could tolerate being seen for only so long before the instinct to reassemble himself took over. All right, he said. What do you need next? I need to write to a lawyer in Cheyenne, she said. Someone who practices territorial law and has no connection to the town council here. I know a man, he said. Samuel Briggs. He handled Eleanor's estate. He's honest. He paused. He'll want to be paid. I know. But the tax recovery alone will cover his fees if we can establish the assessment was illegal. She looked at her notes. I also need to know, are there other ranchers in the valley who might be experiencing similar pressure? Not the ones who sold. The ones who are still here. I thought about it. Tom Haggerty maybe, and the Colson brothers north of the ridge. Tom said something to me last spring about his tax bill going up, but I didn't. He stopped. I didn't ask the right questions. Would you be willing to talk to them? Not to alarm them, just to ask whether they've noticed anything unusual in their contracts or assessments in the last few years. He looked at her. You want to build a case that affects multiple properties, not just mine. If several ranchers can show the same pattern of fraudulent assessment and manipulated contracts, the evidence is considerably harder to dismiss than one man's complaint. She kept her voice even. And it means the people doing this can't simply pivot to another target if the pressure on your property is challenged. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll talk to Tom tomorrow, he said. 3 days passed. They were not quiet days, but they had a structure to them, a rhythm. Abigail had not expected to find, but recognized once it was there. She was in the study by 6 each morning, working through documents, drafting letters, cross-referencing deed records with the territorial statutes she had requested by post from Cheyenne. She ate breakfast with the household, exchanged information with Ethan at supper, and worked again until the lamp oil ran low. Lily moved around her with a kind of careful attention. Not intrusive, never intrusive, but present. She brought coffee without being asked. She retrieved documents from the cabinet with the confidence of someone who had memorized exactly where everything was. Once, when Abigail was working through a particularly knotted entry and making a sound under her breath that she hadn't known she was making, Lily appeared at the study door and said, "Is that the April ledger?" "Yes. Page 42, the entry that looks like a credit but isn't." Abigail turned to page 42 and found it in 30 seconds. A debit recorded as a credit, not a clerical error, because clerical errors don't benefit the same party consistently across 6 entries. "You found this," Abigail said. "I found something wrong. I didn't know what it meant." "It means someone altered these records after they were filed," Abigail said. "After your father signed them." Lily was quiet. "Come here," Abigail said. The girl came to the desk. Abigail showed her the entry, then the corresponding entry in a second ledger, then the receipt that should have matched both and matched neither. "You see?" she said. "Yes," Lily said, studying it with those direct blue eyes. "Someone changed one but forgot the other." "Exactly. They're consistent internally, but they don't match the external record. That's the kind of error that only shows when you look at both documents side by side." Lily looked at her. "Can I help?" she said. Abigail looked at this child, this 9-year-old who had been doing the work of an adult for years, and who had walked 4 miles alone to find help for a father who didn't know how to ask for it, and who was standing here now asking if she could help with the case that was going to determine whether her family survived. "Sit down," she said. "I'll show you what I'm building and where the gaps still are." Lily sat. And for 2 hours that evening, they worked together at the study desk, the woman from Ohio, who had arrived with nothing but $41 and the wrong life, and the girl from Wyoming, who had been carrying the right life on her 9-year-old shoulders for too long, and they went through the records together, line by line. At some point, Ethan appeared in the doorway. Neither of them heard him come in. He stood there for a moment, looking at the two of them bent over the desk in the lamplight, his daughter's finger tracing a column of figures, while Abigail talked her through what she was seeing and whatever expression moved across his face. In that moment, he removed it before either of them looked up. When Lily finally noticed him, she straightened quickly. "Daddy?" "It's late," he said quietly. "Go to bed." I saw what you were doing." He said it without anger. "Go on, I'll come up in a few minutes." Lily looked at Abigail. "Good night," Abigail said. "Good night, Miss Carter." She slid off the chair, paused at the door. "Page 67, she said to Abigail. "I always thought something was wrong with that one, but I couldn't work out why." Then she was gone. Ethan remained in the doorway. He looked at the desk, the organized papers, the cross-referenced notes, the 2 pencils worn down from use. "She talked you into working together," he said. It was not quite a question. "She offered and I accepted," Abigail said. "She has an excellent mind, Mr. Brooks. She sees patterns. That's not a common skill." He was quiet. "She said something to me once," he said slowly. "About 6 months after Eleanor died. She was 7. She said, 'Daddy, I'm going to learn everything Mama knew, so you don't have to miss her so much.'" He stopped. "I told her that was a good thought, and I went out to the barn, and I didn't come back in for 4 hours." The silence that followed had the weight of something that had needed to be said for a long time. "She's been trying to replace her mother," Abigail said gently. "Not because she thinks she can, but because she doesn't know what else to do with how much she loves you." Ethan Brooks looked at the desk for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, though his expression had not changed. "Page 67, he said. "I'll look at it tonight." He nodded. He was halfway out the door when he stopped. "Miss Carter." "Yes." "You're not what I expected." She looked at him. "What did you expect?" A pause. "Someone with fewer opinions and more desperation," he said. She held his gaze. "I have plenty of desperation, Mr. Brooks. I simply don't lead with it." Something moved in his expression, something she couldn't name and didn't try to. "Good night," he said. "Good night." He left. She turned to page 67. It took her 11 minutes to find it, a property boundary notation that had been subtly altered, a single digit changed in a coordinate that on its own meant nothing but cross-referenced against the original survey document, and the most recent county deed filing shifted the recorded eastern boundary of the Brooks Ranch property by 40 feet, 40 feet. 40 feet that by pure coincidence placed the Lower Creek source, the spring that fed 3 downstream properties, outside the formal legal boundary of the Brooks Ranch. Outside the boundary. On the unclaimed public land between the Brooks property and the now sold McIntosh parcel, which Western Territorial Development had acquired 6 months ago. She sat very still for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and began writing, and she did not stop until the lamp finally ran dry and left her in the dark. And even then, she sat a moment longer in the complete silence of the Wyoming night, understanding fully for the first time exactly what she was fighting against and exactly what it was going to take to win. She was not afraid. She was something sharper than afraid. She was certain. She told him at breakfast. Not everything, not the full shape of it, not yet, but enough. She set the survey document and the altered coordinate notation side by side on the table between them, and she watched Ethan's face while he read them, and she saw the exact moment he understood. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down very carefully. 40 feet, he said. 40 feet, she confirmed. Someone altered the property boundary notation in the county deed record. Not the original survey, they couldn't touch that without leaving evidence too obvious to hide. But the deed record, the coordinate, and if the coordinate in the deed record doesn't match the survey, the deed record controls in a legal dispute over ownership. Because the survey is older, he said slowly. Because the survey predates territorial statehood. Under current Wyoming law, the recorded deed takes precedence in boundary disputes unless the original survey can be produced and certified. She paused. Which it can be, because I have it, right here. She set the original survey on the table. Ethan looked at it. He looked at the altered deed record. He looked at the difference between them, that single changed digit, that 40-foot shift that moved a spring from his land to no man's land to someone else's acquisition. Who filed the altered record, he said. The filing stamp is Clifford Renner's office. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside the kitchen window, she could hear the hands beginning their morning work, the sounds of the yard coming to life, boots on frozen ground, the horses in the corral. Normal sounds. The sounds of a ranch that did not yet know how close to the edge it was standing. I need to ride out to Tom Haggerty's this morning, Ethan said. His voice was very controlled. And then the Colson brothers. Yes, she said. And I need you to send the wire to Samuel Briggs today, not tomorrow, today. I'll send it from town. Send Hank. I need you here. She held his gaze. The Goss contract renewal notice is going to arrive this week. When it does, I need you to not respond to it. Not refuse, not accept. Simply don't respond. Silence is not a breach. Silence just means they have to come to you. And when they come, then I want to be in the room, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. You expect them to apply pressure directly, he said. I expect them to escalate, she said carefully. The boundary alteration was subtle. The contract and tax issues were designed to look like normal business. But we've been in this house for less than a week, and already I've found enough to build a legal case. If someone is watching this ranch, and I believe they are, they know something has changed. Ethan was quiet. They've been patient for 4 years, he said. Patient men become impatient when they see their timeline shifting. She said it evenly without drama because it was simply true. We need to move faster than they expect. He stood up from the table. I'll ride to Haggerty's. Take Lily to school first, she said. He stopped. She walks, he said. It's 3 miles and it's October, Abigail said. Take her. Something crossed his face. Not irritation. Something more complicated than that. The look of a man being shown something about himself that he hadn't been looking at directly. All right, he said. Hank left for town with the wire before 8. Ethan rode out with Lily perched behind him on the saddle, her school books wrapped in oilcloth against the morning cold. And Abigail watched them go from the study window and thought about what it costs a proud man to accept that he's been outmaneuvered on his own land for 4 years, and whether that cost would make him careful or reckless. She didn't know yet. She hoped careful. She turned back to her work. By mid-morning, she had drafted 3 letters, one to the Territorial Records Office in Cheyenne, requesting the certified copy of the original Boundary Survey 1 to the County Deed Registry, formally disputing the 1886 coordinate notation as inconsistent with the original survey on file, and one to the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. Outlining in general terms a pattern of coordinated contract manipulation affecting multiple ranches in the Red Creek Valley, and requesting any documentation the association might hold regarding complaints against Harlan Goss. She was sealing the 3rd envelope when she heard the horse in the yard. Not Ethan, she knew the sound of that horse now, she realized 3 days in, and not Hank. A single horse coming fast and stopping hard. She heard Martha open the back door. A man's voice, young, out of breath. Then Martha appeared in the study doorway. Her face was composed, but her hands were doing the thing they did when she was managing herself, pressing flat against her apron. It's Billy, she said. He was riding the east fence line. Abigail was already on her feet. What happened? 3 head of cattle down in the lower east pasture, Martha said. He thinks they've been poisoned. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Abigail held very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, Where's the nearest hand who can ride to Mr. Brooks? Pete, he's in the barn. Send him, right now. She went to the back door. Billy was a 19-year-old with a good, honest face, and he was still breathing hard from the ride. He had his hat in his hands, and he was twisting it. Tell me exactly what you saw, she said. 3 cows, ma'am. Down on their sides in the lower east pasture near the creek feeder. 2 were already gone. The 3rd was, she wasn't right, stumbling and then going down. He swallowed. I've seen bad water do that before. But Mr. Brooks tested that creek feeder himself 2 weeks back, said it was clean. Was there anything near the site, any sign of someone having been on the property? Billy hesitated. There was tracks, he said. Boot tracks coming from the direction of the McIntosh property line, but they stopped at the fence. He hesitated again. The fence had been cut and restrung. Someone who didn't know what they were looking for wouldn't have seen it. But I restring fence often enough I could see where the splice was. Abigail looked at him steadily. You didn't imagine that, she said. No, ma'am. All right, don't touch the cattle, and don't let anyone else near that section of fence. When Mr. Brooks gets back. I'm back, said Ethan. He was in the doorway. He had ridden hard. She could see it in the horse blowing and lathered at the hitching post, and whatever Tom Haggerty had told him this morning had already cost him something before he heard about the cattle. His expression was tight and contained in the way of controlled fury. How many? He said to Billy. 3 head, sir, lower east. The Angus cows. 2 of them, yes, sir, and the Hereford cross. Ethan's jaw worked. Those were not the cheapest animals in the herd. Someone had known which ones to target. Go back out there, he said to Billy. Don't leave that fence line. Billy went. Ethan came inside. He stood in the kitchen and looked at Abigail, and the controlled fury was still there. But underneath it, visible now, was something else. The specific fear of a man who has just realized the threat is more serious than he understood. Tom Haggerty's books, he said. Same pattern, same tax assessor, same broker. He stopped. The Colson brothers sold 6 weeks ago. I didn't know. She had not known that either. Who did they sell to? She said. A land company, Denver. He looked at her. The man who came to make the offer, Tom saw him once in town. Said he'd seen him before, in Renner's office. There it was. The visible connection. Not provable yet, not in court, but real. Hank's back, Martha said from the doorway. Tell him I need him, Ethan said without looking away from Abigail. Hank appeared a moment later, reading the room in the way of a man who has worked alongside one person long enough to know what their trouble looks like. Wires sent, he said. Miss Carter. He held out a folded paper. She took it. It was from Gerald Potts, written in the station's telegram hand, marked as received this morning while Hank was there. She read it. Her face did not change. What is it? Ethan said. She looked up. Western Territorial Development has filed a preliminary claim on the Lower Creek source. They filed it in Laramie 2 days ago, citing the deed record boundary as establishing the spring as public land adjacent to their acquired property. She set the paper on the table. They were waiting for us. The kitchen was very quiet. They knew we'd find it, Ethan said. They assumed someone would eventually, she said. So they filed first. The claim gives them a legal standing to contest any counterfiling we make. It doesn't give them ownership, not yet, but it makes the dispute more complicated and more expensive. She paused. It also means they have a lawyer who's been ready to move for some time. Ethan put both hands flat on the table. They poisoned my cattle, he said, very quietly, very controlled, to remind me what it costs to fight. Yes, she said. I think so. Then they filed this. He looked at the telegram. On the same morning. Coordination, she said. This wasn't improvised. Someone gave a signal. He was quiet for a moment. Renner, he said. He's the most likely central connection, yes. But we can't go at him directly yet, not without more evidence of his personal involvement, rather than just his official acts. She looked at Ethan steadily. I know that's not what you want to hear. What I want, he said very carefully, is to ride into town right now. I know. She held his gaze. And if you do that, you hand them exactly what they need. An angry rancher making accusations without documentation is a gift to their lawyer. The case falls apart before Samuel Briggs even arrives. His hands pressed harder against the table. How long until Briggs gets here? He said. If he received the wire this morning and can travel 3 days, perhaps 4, and in 3 or 4 days, we build the rest of the case, she said, together. He looked at her. The fury was still there, but something else was working its way through it, the recognition, grudging and real, that she was right. All right, he said. It cost him. She could see it cost him. I need one thing from you, she said. Right now. Name it. The hands, all of them. I need them to know that if anyone comes onto this property, anyone at all, for any reason they do not engage. They observe, they note, they report. No confrontation, no threats. She paused. If they're trying to provoke a response that justifies legal action against you, we don't give them one. Ethan looked at Hank. You heard her, he said. Hank nodded slowly. I'll talk to the boys. And the cattle, she said. I know it's distressing, but leave them where they are until the county sheriff can come out and document what he finds. Don't move them, and don't clean up the site. You want official record, Ethan said. I want the sheriff looking at evidence before it's disturbed, she said. Because what Billy found at that fence line is as important as the cattle themselves. He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done this before," he said, not a question. "This kind of fighting." "Not exactly this," she said honestly, "but similar. The principles are the same. Evidence first, action second, always." He nodded once. Then he went out to send for the sheriff. The sheriff was a lean, methodical man named Cal Whitmore, who arrived before noon and walked the lower east pasture with Billy and Hank, while Abigail waited at the house and organized her documentation into a format that a court of law could follow. She heard them come back into the yard an hour later. She heard Ethan's voice controlled and low. She heard Whitmore's steady, unhurried the voice of a man who has seen enough of human nature to not be surprised by most of it. When Ethan came inside, his face told her before he spoke. "Whitmore says the cattle were poisoned," he said. "Arsenic compound most likely based on what he saw. He's sending for the county examiner to confirm." "And the fence line?" "He documented it. Photographs and measurements." He paused. "He knows the boot tracks crossed the McIntosh property line. He's not in a position to act on that without more, but he wrote it in his report." "That's what we needed," she said. "An official report documenting unauthorized access and a corresponding incident of livestock destruction. That's the beginning of a criminal pattern of evidence separate from the civil property dispute." Ethan sat down heavily in the study chair. It was the first time she had seen him sit heavily. He always lowered himself into chairs with the deliberate care of a man conscious of his own body. This time, he simply sat. "Tom Haggerty called it a campaign," he said. "That's the word he used. He said, 'Abigail, they're running a campaign against us, and I didn't see it until you told me what to look for.'" He stopped. "He didn't mean you specifically. He said it to me." "But he called you Abigail," she said quietly. He looked at her. "He said, 'Ethan, you'd better hold on to that woman,'" he said. "Because what she found in a week the rest of us missed for 4 years." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" she asked. He looked at the desk. "I said she wasn't mine to hold on to." The silence between them held something that neither of them reached for. Then she said, "I need to write to a newspaper." He blinked. "What?" "Not here, not the Red Creek paper, they're too close to the council. The Cheyenne Daily Leader. There's a reporter there named Frank Aldrich who covered the 1886 water rights cases in Johnson County. His work was factual and fair." She was already reaching for paper. "We don't make accusations. We simply describe in accurate and documented terms a pattern of deed record irregularities affecting multiple ranches in the valley, and we note that the matter is currently under legal review." Ethan stared at her. "You want to put this in the newspaper?" "I want to make the actions of these men visible before they expect visibility," she said. "Men who operate through quiet financial and legal manipulation rely on being able to move without public attention. A newspaper article, even a restrained one, changes the calculation. It makes certain actions more costly for them. Or it makes them angry. They're already willing to poison cattle," she said steadily. "What I'm concerned about is their next move being something less visible and more damaging than that. Sunlight is a deterrent." She paused. "Not a perfect one, but a real one." He thought about it. She could see him thinking, not reacting the quality she was coming to rely on in him, the way his stubbornness slowed down into something more useful under pressure. "Send it," he said finally. She wrote it that afternoon. 3 drafts, each one more precise than the last, removing anything that could be characterized as accusation and keeping only what was documented fact. By the time she was done, it was 4 pages of plain, careful language that told the truth without overreaching it, and every claim in it had a document to support it. It was the most important thing she had written since the legal notice that had cost Henderson's mill $40,000. She sealed it and gave it to Hank to take to town. That evening, Lily came home from school and stopped in the doorway of the study. She looked at Abigail's face, and then at the organized stacks of papers and the sealed envelopes and the new notes covering the desk, and she said with the directness that Abigail had come to expect from her, "Something happened today." "Yes," Abigail said. "Bad. Serious. Your father will explain. Lily looked at her for a moment. Are we going to be all right? Abigail looked at this child, this 9-year-old, who asked about whether they were going to be all right with the same voice. Other children used to ask for more pie because she had long since stopped having the luxury of pretending problems didn't exist. We're going to fight, Abigail said. That's what I can promise you. Lily considered this with those direct blue eyes. That's enough, she said, and went to hang up her coat. Ethan appeared in the study doorway an hour later. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper, older, worn at the creases. This came 3 months ago, he said. I didn't show it to Lily. He set it on the desk in front of Abigail. She unfolded it. It was an offer. Formal letterhead, Denver address. Western Territorial Development offering to purchase the Brooks Ranch in its entirety for a price that was, she ran the number against what she knew of the property's value, approximately 60% of what it was actually worth. Standard opening offer from people who intended to negotiate down. At the bottom in handwritten script, someone had added, the offer stands for 60 days. After that, we cannot guarantee the same terms will be available. The 60 days expired in 11 days. She looked up at Ethan. You were going to refuse, she said. I was going to refuse, he confirmed. But you held on to it. Because I didn't understand why they wanted it badly enough to put that kind of money on paper. He paused. Now I do. Now we both do, she said. He sat down across from her. He looked at the stacks of evidence she'd assembled, the ledgers, the cross-reference notes, the survey documents, the telegram from Gerald Potts, the sheriff's preliminary report. They think they have 11 days to make us desperate enough to take the offer, he said. Or frightened enough, she said. The cattle was a message. Then we have 11 days to make their case impossible. Yes, she said. We do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This close, she could see the exhaustion in him, not weakness, but the particular weight of a man who has been carrying something too long and has only recently admitted to himself, if not to anyone else, that he cannot carry it alone. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him surprised. When Lily brought you here, he said slowly, I thought it was a foolish child's idea, and I accepted it because refusing would have hurt her, and I calculated that the damage you could do in a month was limited, and I could manage it. He paused. That was arrogant. It was reasonable, she said. You didn't know me. I still don't know you, he said. Not really, but I know what I've watched you do this week, and I know what you found in one night that I missed for 4 years, and I know... He stopped. I know that what you're doing isn't just about the money I'm going to pay you. She was quiet for a moment. Lily asked me if we're going to be all right, she said. What did you tell her? That we were going to fight. She paused. It seemed more honest than promising an outcome I can't guarantee. He looked at her steadily. That's how you think about it, fighting. How do you think about it? Howe was quiet for a long moment. When Eleanor died, he said, I stopped thinking about the future very much. I thought about the next season, the next contract, the next year's taxes, keeping this place running long enough for Lily to grow up in it. He looked at his hands. I stopped thinking about it as something worth fighting for. I started thinking about it as something I was obligated not to lose. She understood the difference. It was the difference between the grip of love and the grip of duty, and they felt the same in the hands, but they come from different places. It's worth fighting for, she said quietly. Whatever you've been telling yourself. He looked at her. The gray-green eyes were open again, the way they'd been that night when he'd stood in the study doorway and said he'd missed it completely. That brief, unguarded interval that came and went in him like a break in cloud cover. I know, he said. I'm starting to remember that. The following morning she woke before 5 to the smell of smoke. Not the chimney smoke of a house warming itself, wrong direction, wrong intensity. She was out of bed and at the window in seconds, and she could see it immediately. The south end of the large barn. A red line of fire running along the roof line, not yet catastrophic, but moving fast in the October wind. She was out the door and into the yard, shouting before she'd entirely registered that she was running. The hands came out of the bunkhouse at the sound of her voice, and Ethan came out of the house 20 seconds later, And for the next hour, there was nothing in the world but the effort to contain what could be contained and accept what couldn't. They lost 40 feet of the south wall and the loft above it. They saved the rest. The horses were out. The cattle in the near pen were clear. The equipment shed was untouched. When it was over, and the sun was coming up gray and cold over the ridge, and everyone was standing in the yard covered in ash and soot, Abigail looked at Ethan and he looked at her. "That's not an accident," Hank said. "No," Ethan said. "The fire started from the outside," Billy said. He was pointing to the base of the south wall where the burn pattern began. "See how it goes inward. It started outside and burned in." They all looked. Cal Whitmore was going to have another report to write. Ethan turned to Abigail. His face was gray with ash, and his expression was controlled, and underneath it she could see the thing that had been building since the poisoned cattle and the telegram and the purchase offer with its handwritten threat. 11 days, she said before he could speak. "We have 11 days. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. "Then let's not waste them," he said. She nodded. She went inside, and she sat down at the desk, and she began to write, and her hand was completely steady, and she did not stop. 3 miles away, Lily Brooks sat in a schoolroom and stared at her arithmetic without seeing it, thinking about her father and thinking about the woman from Ohio, and thinking the way children think when they are trying to hold something very large and very frightening in a mind not quite big enough for it, that she had done the right thing. She had to believe she had done the right thing. Because if she was wrong, she had made everything worse. She pressed her pencil against the paper and did her arithmetic and waited for the school day to end so she could go home and find out. Samuel Briggs arrived on the Wednesday morning train. Abigail knew him the moment he stepped onto the platform, not because she had met him before, but because he moved through the Red Creek station with the specific, unhurried confidence of a man who has spent 30 years walking into rooms where other people were already nervous. He was 60, perhaps 62, with a gray beard, trimmed close, and a coat that had seen considerable use without losing its dignity. He carried a leather case that was visibly heavy, and he did not ask anyone to carry it for him. Ethan shook his hand. Briggs looked at him the way lawyers look at clients they are assessing before committing. "Your wire said urgent," Briggs said. "It is," Ethan said. "They always are." He looked past Ethan to Abigail. "You're the bookkeeper." "Yes," she said. "The wire said you found the boundary alteration." "Yes." He studied her for a moment with the same assessing look he'd given Ethan, except more thorough. "Good," he said. "I brought the 1884 Territorial Statute compilation and the county deed filing protocols for the period in question. If the alteration is what your wire described, we have grounds for a fraud filing in territorial court." He picked up his case. "I'll need to see everything you have, all of it, tonight." "It's organized and waiting," she said. "Even better." He looked at Ethan. "I also need to speak with your sheriff. Whitmore, I know him. He's solid. He filed 2 reports already," Ethan said. "Cattle poisoning and the fire." Briggs went still for exactly 1 second. "They burned your barn," he said. "South wall, 3 nights ago." Briggs set his case down. He looked at Ethan, and then at Abigail, and then at the main street of Red Creek, as though he were mapping something. "Then we have less time than I thought," he said. "Get me to the ranch." They drove fast. Briggs sat in the wagon bed with his case on his knees and asked questions, the entire 4 miles precise sequential questions that told Abigail he had already built a preliminary structure in his mind from the wire and was now filling it in. He didn't ask about emotion or history or what it had been like. He asked about dates, names, document numbers, and filing sequences. She answered everything without notes because by this point she had the entire case architecture memorized. By the time they reached the ranch gate, Briggs had stopped asking questions and was simply thinking. She could see at the slight distance in his eyes the internal arrangement of pieces. "The boundary fraud is the spine," he said almost to himself. "Everything else hangs off it. The tax manipulation created the financial pressure. The contract exploitation created the ongoing debt trap. The intimidation, the cattle, the fire, that's desperation. They expected the financial pressure to be sufficient." It nearly was, Ethan said quietly. Briggs looked at him. What changed? Ethan didn't answer immediately. She did, he said. Briggs glanced at Abigail. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration of some kind. All right, he said. Show me everything. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening without stopping. Briggs moved through Abigail's organized documentation with the focused speed of a man who reads legal material, the way most people read plain sentences twice as fast and retaining everything. He asked questions. She answered. He made notes in a hand so small and precise it was barely legible. He occasionally held a document up to the lamp and looked at it for a long time without speaking. At 6, Lily came home from school and stood in the study doorway. Briggs looked up. This is Lily, Ethan said. The one who started all this, Briggs said. Lily looked at him steadily. I noticed things weren't right, she said. I just didn't know how to fix them. Briggs regarded her for a moment. How old are you? 9. You maintained a parallel filing system to your father's official ledgers. Yes, sir. And you identified at least 3 entries that didn't match between the 2 systems. 4, she said. Miss Carter found the 5th. Briggs looked at Abigail. She may need to testify, he said. A child witness in a fraud case if she's credible. She's credible, Abigail said without hesitation. Briggs looked back at Lily. Can you explain what you found in words a judge can understand? Lily thought about it for a moment. I can explain what didn't match and why it mattered. I don't know all the legal words for it. I'll teach you the legal words, Briggs said. You supply the understanding. That's a workable division of labor. He turned back to the documents. Sit down, Lily Brooks. I may have questions for you. Lily sat. She folded her hands on her knees and waited with the composed patience of a child who has learned that waiting is one of the most important skills a person can have. Ethan watched his daughter from the doorway, and Abigail saw his throat move the specific swallow of a man containing something he doesn't intend to release. By 9 o'clock, Briggs had seen everything. He sat back and looked at the ceiling in the way of a man performing a final count. All right, he said. Here's where we stand. The boundary fraud is documentable and prosecutable. The deed alteration cross-referenced against the original certified survey constitutes willful falsification of public record. That's a criminal charge, not merely a civil one. The tax manipulation is recoverable with the statute documentation Abigail has requested from Cheyenne. He paused. The contract exploitation is civil, but adds to the pattern evidence. The livestock poisoning and the fire are criminal matters under Sheriff Whitmore's jurisdiction. Can we win? Ethan said. Winning in court and winning in reality are 2 different things, Briggs said. In court, yes. The evidence is strong. The problem is that the people behind this have resources and resources by delay. They'll file counter-motions. They'll challenge document authenticity. They'll argue procedural issues. He looked at Ethan steadily. This could take 8 months, possibly longer. We don't have 8 months, Ethan said. We have 9 days before their purchase offer expires. I know. Briggs tapped his pen against his notepad. Which is why we're not going to wait for a courtroom. Abigail looked at him. What do you mean? Western Territorial Development is a shell company, Briggs said. I know this because I made inquiries the day I received your wire, and I have a contact in Denver who confirmed it. The real money behind it belongs to a man named Arthur Crane. He's a Denver financier, not a criminal in the conventional sense, but a man who has built his fortune by acquiring undervalued assets through systematic financial pressure. He paused. He has done this before, not in Wyoming, in Colorado, and in Nebraska. In both cases, the ranchers sold. In both cases, Crane's companies then sold the water rights to railroad development interests at several times the acquisition price. The room was very still. He's done this before, Ethan said. Twice that I can document, Briggs said. Which means there's a pattern. And a pattern across 3 territories is the kind of thing that attracts federal attention. You've already contacted someone, Abigail said. It was not a question. Briggs looked at her. I contacted a colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Cheyenne the morning I received Ethan's wire, he said. I described the situation in general terms. He described it as, and I'm quoting, consistent with a pattern of violations we've been trying to document for 2 years. Ethan put his hand flat on the desk. They've been investigating Crane, he said. Trying to, Briggs said. They've had difficulty because the shell company structure obscures the ownership trail. What they've needed is a documented instance of the fraud in action with physical evidence, multiple witnesses, official reports, and a clear paper trail connecting the local agents to the parent company. He looked around the study at the organized stacks of documents, the cross-referenced ledgers, the survey comparisons, the sheriff's reports, the carefully assembled case architecture. Miss Carter has built them exactly that. The silence that followed had a different quality than any silence that had come before it in this house. It had the quality of something turning. What happens now? Abigail said. Now we do 2 things simultaneously, Briggs said. First, we file for an emergency injunction in territorial court to freeze the Western Territorial Development claim on the spring and halt any further action against this property. That filing goes in tomorrow morning. I'll ride to the county seat tonight. He paused. Second, I send a full copy of this documentation package to my contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office by tomorrow's first post. With that package, they have enough to open a formal federal investigation. And Renner, Ethan said. His voice was flat and controlled, in the way that meant he was holding something back. Renner will be named in the injunction filing as the party responsible for the deed alteration, Briggs said. That filing becomes public record the moment it's accepted. The newspaper article Miss Carter has already sent to the Cheyenne Daily Leader. He looked at her with something that might have been approval, will coincide in a manner that is not coincidental. Abigail had timed the letter for Thursday delivery. Today was Wednesday. It runs tomorrow, she said. Yes, Briggs said. It does. He closed his notepad. These men have operated in shadow for 4 years. Tomorrow they operate in daylight. And men who have spent 4 years building something in shadow are not prepared for daylight. Ethan was quiet for a long time. They'll know it's coming, he said. Someone in this town will tell them. Probably, Briggs agreed. Which is why I need to be at the county seat tonight, and the filing needs to be in front of the judge, first thing in the morning, before they can file any countermotion or apply any pressure to delay it. He stood up. He picked up his heavy leather case. I'll need copies of the key documents, he said to Abigail. The boundary alteration comparison, the original survey certification request, the sheriff's 2 reports, and the purchase offer with the handwritten notation. She already had them in a separate folder. She handed it to him. He took it without surprise, which was itself a kind of acknowledgement. Mr. Brooks, he said, turning to Ethan, do not leave this property tonight. Don't ride into town. Don't confront anyone. Don't respond to any communication that arrives before you hear from me. Understood, Ethan said. Briggs looked at Lily, who had been sitting with her folded hands and her composed expression throughout the entire conversation. Lily, he said, you did well. Lily looked at him. I didn't do anything yet, she said. You kept records, he said. In this business, that's everything. He went out. They heard the wagon for several minutes, then nothing. The 3 of them remained in the study. Ethan standing Abigail at the desk. Lily still in her chair with her hands folded. Martha appeared in the doorway, looked at all 3 of them, and disappeared again without speaking, which was its own kind of eloquence. He's good, Abigail said. He's the best I know, Ethan said. He looked at the folder she had handed Briggs, or rather at the desk where it had been. You had it ready. I prepared it this afternoon, she said, in case he needed it tonight. He looked at her. You knew he would, he said. I thought he might, she said. If he was worth what you said he was. Ethan sat down in the chair across from the desk. He looked tired, not defeated, not the exhausted defeat of a man losing, but the bone-level tiredness of a man who has been running at full intensity for days without enough sleep, and is finally in a moment where stopping briefly is possible. 9 days, he said. 8 after tonight, she said. Will the injunction hold? If the judge accepts it, and Briggs believes he will, then yes. It freezes their claim legally while the fraud investigation proceeds. They can't complete the land acquisition while an active fraud allegation sits on the filing. And if Crane decides to walk away from the Wyoming operation entirely, then the shell company dissolves and the claim dissolves with it, she said. Which is also a win for you. The spring stays on your property by default. Ethan was quiet. And Renner, he said again. The second time he'd asked. She understood why he kept asking. Renner will face the fraud allegation regardless of what Crane does, she said. The deed alteration has his office's stamp. That doesn't evaporate if the parent company retreats. Good, he said, flat and final. Lily unfolded her hands and stood up from the chair. She looked at her father and then at Abigail. I'm going to bed, she said. Good night, Ethan said. She paused at the door. She looked at Abigail with those direct blue eyes, and for a moment the composed 9-year-old exterior showed the edge of something underneath it, something young and frightened and very, very tired. Miss Carter, she said, are you going to stay? After this is over? The room went very quiet. Abigail looked at her. She thought about the train platform and the $41.30 and the letter she had thrown onto the tracks with both hands. She thought about a question asked by a child carrying a basket of eggs. Would you marry my cowboy daddy instead? She thought about the curtains in the guest room faded from sun, hemmed by a woman who sang off-key and smelled like bread and had been gone for 3 years. She thought about what she was here for and what she had agreed to, and what had changed in the space between those two things. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Lily held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once in the manner of someone accepting an honest answer and finding it more valuable than a comfortable lie. She went to bed, in the silence she left behind. Ethan Brooks and Abigail Carter did not speak for a long time. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and neither of them was ready to navigate it yet. There was still too much to do. There was still a case to win, and a ranch to save, and a tomorrow to get to. But the question sat in the room with them, and neither of them asked it to leave. The next morning arrived with news. Hank came in from town before breakfast fast enough that they heard the horse before they were fully awake, and the sound of it brought Ethan down the stairs, with his boots still unlaced, and Abigail out of the study, where she had already been working for an hour. Renner's gone, Hank said from the doorway. He was breathing hard. His office is locked up. His house is cleared out. Gerald Potts says he put his wife and her things on the 6 a.m. eastbound and rode out of town on his own horse an hour later. No one spoke for a moment. He ran, Ethan said. He knew the filing was coming, Abigail said. Her mind was already moving. Someone told him. Either someone in Briggs's confidence or someone at the county seat who saw the injunction arrive. She paused. It doesn't matter. His running is its own evidence. He took the county seal, Hank said, the one he used for official filings. Gerald said the deputy found the office empty of everything with an official stamp on it. Ethan looked at Abigail. He's trying to remove the evidence of his own filings, she said. It won't work. The territorial records in Cheyenne hold copies of everything, but it tells us he knows exactly what he's been doing and has no intention of facing it. She turned to the desk. I need to wire Briggs right now. She wrote the wire in 90 seconds and sent Hank back to town with it before he'd caught his breath. Then she sat down and thought about what Renner's flight meant for the shape of what was coming. The injunction would still hold the fraud allegation. Didn't depend on Renner being present. It depended on the documented alteration. But his disappearance would complicate the criminal component. A man who has fled is harder to prosecute. The financial recovery might still be possible. The criminal accountability was now murkier. She was still thinking about it when the second piece of news arrived. This one came from Tom Haggerty, who rode in at 8 in the morning with his hat in his hand, and an expression she hadn't seen on him before, a combination of anger and something that looked under the anger like shame. I need to tell you something, he said to Ethan, and I need you to hear it before you hear it from someone else. They sat in the kitchen. Martha poured coffee and then removed herself. 6 months ago, Tom said, addressing the table rather than Ethan. A man came to see me. Not Renner, someone from Denver, well-dressed, spoke careful. He made me an offer. Not to buy my place. He called it an information arrangement. He wanted to know about Ethan's operation, what the finances looked like, whether he was struggling, whether the hands were loyal. The kitchen was very quiet. Tom, Ethan said. Very quietly. I didn't take it, Tom said. His jaw was tight. I told him to get off my property, but... He stopped. But I'd already told him enough before I understood what he was asking. Just neighbors talking. He asked how business was in the valley. I said it had been a hard few years for most of us, Ethan included. I said the Brooks Ranch had good land, but the debt situation was, I said it was known that the finances were stretched. He looked up. I didn't know what I was giving him, but I gave it. Ethan was silent. Abigail watched Ethan's face and saw the movement through it, the first instinct, which was anger, and the second thing that moved through behind the anger, which was the recognition of a man who understands what it is to be used without entirely knowing it. You came here to tell me, Ethan said. You deserve to know. Tom's voice was rough. And I deserve whatever you think of me after. The silence stretched. I don't think anything of you after, Ethan said finally. They were doing this to both of us. They used you as a tool the same as they used Harlan Goss's contracts. The difference is, you came to tell me. He paused. That counts. Tom's throat worked. Will it matter? He said. In the legal case. Abigail spoke then. It might actually. The Denver operative who approached you, do you remember what he looked like? Anything specific? Tom described him. She wrote it down. She would send it to Briggs, and through Briggs, to the U.S. Attorney's Office. A man who approaches neighboring ranchers for competitive intelligence on behalf of a shell company is an agent of that company. His presence established direct operational connection between Crane's Denver organization and the on-the-ground manipulation of the valley's ranchers. It was another thread in the rope they were building. Tom left an hour later, steadier than he'd arrived. He shook Ethan's hand at the door and held it a moment longer than a handshake required. Whatever you need, he said. I mean it. I know you do, Ethan said. By midday, the territorial court had accepted the injunction. Briggs sent word by telegram accepted and stamped freeze on the Western Territorial Development spring claim, effective immediately, hearing scheduled for 3 weeks hence. He added one line at the end, Cheyenne has been notified. Federal review opening Monday. Ethan read the telegram 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, same pocket where he'd put the list she'd given him the first morning. He found her in the study. It's done, he said. The first part, she said. Yes. The hearing in 3 weeks, will we be ready? We're ready now, she said. 3 weeks just gives us time to be more ready. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides. Not crossed, she noticed the way they'd been that first day in the yard. Just at his sides. I need to ask you something, he said. She set down her pen. The month, he said. You agreed to 1 month. I remember. That's, he calculated, 12 days from now. Yes. If the hearing is in 3 weeks, you'd be gone before it. She looked at him steadily. I could prepare everything Briggs needs to handle the hearing without my presence. That's not... He stopped. Started again. That's not what I'm asking. She waited. I don't know how to do this, he said. It was said plainly, without performance. I haven't asked anyone for anything since Eleanor. I'm not practiced at it. Asking, she said gently. Needing, he said. I'm not practiced at needing. She was quiet for a moment. You don't have to ask me to stay, she said. Not today. There's still work to do, and work doesn't require. Abigail. He said her name, her first name, the first time. It changed the texture of the room entirely. I'm asking you to stay. She looked at him. At the man who had stood in the yard with his arms crossed and his jaw set, who had paused outside the study door and not knocked, who had said she wasn't his to hold on to, and who had carried this ranch and this grief and this daughter alone for 3 years, and done it without once asking the world for anything more than what it owed him. "I'll stay through the hearing," she said. "After that we'll—" "No." He shook his head. "I'm not asking you to stay through the hearing. I'm asking you to stay." The difference between those two sentences was everything. She looked at him for a long moment. The careful, honest, frightened, steady man who needed her and knew it and was saying so. Which was, she understood now, the hardest thing he had done in years. "All right," she said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't reach for her or make any movement toward her. He simply nodded, and the set of his shoulders changed in a way that was barely visible but real, and he went back out to his ranch. She sat for a moment and looked at the faded curtains through the study window, and she thought about Eleanor Brooks, who had made them, and about the question Lily had asked the night before, and about the train platform, and the 3 days, and the letter on the tracks. She thought, "I would not have chosen this. But here I am, and here is a life that needs what I have." She picked up her pen and went back to work. That evening at supper, Lily looked at her father, and then at Abigail, and then at her father again with those direct blue eyes, reading something in the space between the two adults that she hadn't seen there before. "Miss Carter's staying," she said. It was not a question. Ethan looked at his daughter. "Yes," he said. Lily picked up her fork. She looked at her plate, and the expression that moved across her face was not the composed, controlled expression of a 9-year-old managing herself carefully. It was something younger and more open than that. Something that looked like relief so complete, it was almost grief. She ate her supper without another word. But once, when she thought no one was looking, she pressed her small hand flat against the table, not reaching for either of them, just pressing her hand against the solid surface as though confirming to herself that the ground was still there. Abigail saw it. She said nothing. She did not need to. The next 8 days moved with a controlled urgency that Abigail later found difficult to describe accurately because they felt simultaneously very long and very fast. The particular time distortion of days spent working towards something that matters more than you initially expected it to. Frank Aldrich's piece ran in the Cheyenne Daily Leader on Thursday and was picked up by the Wyoming Tribune on Saturday. It was factual and precise and used none of the language of accusation, simply laying out in Abigail's carefully chosen words the documented pattern of deed record irregularities and coordinated financial pressure affecting multiple ranches in the Red Creek Valley. Aldrich had added with the instincts of a good reporter that the matter was under review by territorial authorities and that at least one local official had recently departed the area. That last line ran without any prompting from her. She appreciated it. By Monday, the town had changed. Not dramatically, not in any way that was visible all at once. But Abigail felt it when Hank went to town for supplies and came back reporting that 3 men had stopped him on the street to ask questions. That the general store owner had sent over a delivery that Ethan hadn't ordered. That Cal Whitmore had been seen having a long conversation with 2 men from Cheyenne in front of the county building, and that those men had not been seen before in Red Creek. The U.S. Attorney's men were here. Briggs confirmed it by telegram. On Tuesday, Federal Review formally opened preliminary interviews being conducted. Cooperation requested from all parties holding documentation related to Western Territorial Development's Wyoming operations. Abigail sent her complete documentation package to Cheyenne by secured post on Wednesday morning. The package was 112 pages cross-indexed with a 6-page summary at the front, written in language clear enough that a non-specialist could follow the argument from beginning to end. She had been building it since the second night in the study. On Thursday, a letter arrived from Denver. It was addressed to Ethan on the letterhead of a law firm she didn't recognize. She set it on the desk and waited for him. He read it standing up, and she watched his face. "They're withdrawing the purchase offer," he said. "Early," she said. 8 days early." He set the letter down. "They say they are pursuing other opportunities in the territory and wish Mr. Brooks continued success in his ranching operation." He looked up. "They're running. Crane is cutting his losses before the federal investigation formally names him," she said. "If he withdraws the offer and dissolves the Wyoming operation, he can argue his involvement was passive investment, and he had no knowledge of the fraudulent methods used by local agents." "Will that work?" "Not with the documentation we have," she said. Because Tom Haggerty's Denver operative connects the parent company to the operational strategy. And because the timeline of the boundary alteration and the shell company's formation are too close to argue ignorance. She paused. But it might slow things down. Does it matter to the ranch? He said. The injunction holds. The injunction holds regardless of the offer withdrawal, she said. The fraud allegation is on file. The spring stays yours. He stood very still for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He laughed, not loudly, quietly, almost to himself, a short sound of genuine relief that was so unexpected that it changed his face entirely. It stays mine, he said. It always was yours, she said. We just proved it. He looked at her. The laugh faded, but the thing underneath it didn't, the relief real and deep. Come outside, he said. She looked at him. The hands, he said. They've been working alongside this for 2 weeks without being told everything. They deserve to hear it. She followed him into the yard. Hank was there, and Billy, and 3 other hands she'd learned by name over the past 2 weeks. Martha appeared in the doorway without being called. Even the ranch dog sat up from where it had been sleeping against the fence post. Ethan stood in front of them with his hands at his sides and said simply and plainly that the injunction had held, that the purchase offer had been withdrawn, that the federal investigation was open, and that the Brooks Ranch was not going anywhere. He said it without drama and without elaboration. Hank took his hat off, looked at it, and put it back on. Billy said, "Good." One of the other hands, a quiet older man named Ira, who had worked the Brooks Ranch for 7 years and never said more than was strictly necessary, looked at Abigail directly. "Ma'am," he said. She nodded. That was all. It was enough. That evening, Lily came home from school and dropped her books inside the door and walked directly to the study where Abigail was writing the final summary for Samuel Briggs. "I heard in town," Lily said. "Mrs. Potts told me." "Word travels fast," Abigail said. "In Red Creek it does." Lily sat in the chair she had come to think of as hers, the one across the desk from Abigail. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at the desk, and then she looked at Abigail. "I didn't ask you to marry Daddy because we needed another mother," she said. The words came quietly, without preamble, the way Lily's most important sentences always came. Abigail set down her pen. "I know I said that on the platform," Lily continued. "About marrying him. I said it because I thought that was the only way you'd come. But that wasn't the real reason." She looked down. "The real reason is Daddy stopped smiling after Mama died. He worked. He took care of things. He made sure I had everything I needed." She paused. "But he stopped smiling. And I didn't know how to fix that. I tried everything I knew how to try." She looked up. Her voice was very steady, which was the most heartbreaking kind of steady. "And then you came. And the second week you were here, I heard him laugh at something you said when you were working in the study. I heard it from upstairs." She paused again. It was the first time in 3 years. The room was completely quiet. Abigail looked at this child who had walked 4 miles with a basket of eggs and changed 4 lives with 6 words. "Lily," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I heard it too," she said. "That laugh. I heard it and I thought that's what this place should sound like." Lily's composure held for another 2 seconds. Then it didn't. She didn't cry loudly. She wasn't a loud child in any respect, but the tears came, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth, and Abigail moved around the desk and sat beside her in the study chair, and put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders and held her while she cried for the first time in what felt from the way it came out of her like a very long time. The door was open. Ethan appeared in it. He saw them. He stood very still. Lily looked up and saw her father, and something in her expression, through the tears, through the composure, reassembling itself, was the most honest thing Abigail had ever watched a child show a parent. Ethan crossed the room. He knelt beside the chair. He put both arms around his daughter and held her the way you hold something precious that you are terrified of losing, and Lily put her face against his shoulder and held on. Abigail moved slightly to give them space. She felt the arm around her wrist. Lily's hand, small and certain, holding her in place. She stayed. The three of them remained there in the study, while the lamp burned, and the Wyoming night settled in around the house, and the rebuilt south wall of the barn stood solid against the cold, and the spring ran on the east boundary, where it had always run, and the Brooks Ranch breathed in and breathed out, and was still there, still standing, still whole. The hearing was set for a Tuesday. Abigail woke before 4 that morning without needing an alarm. She lay still for a moment in the guest room with its faded curtains and its good mattress, listening to the house breathe around her, and she thought about everything that had been assembled over the past 3 weeks, and whether it was enough, and whether she had missed anything. She had not missed anything. She knew she had not missed anything because she had gone through it 4 times, and Briggs had gone through it twice, and the U.S. Attorney's man, a careful, understated figure named Kellerman, who had arrived from Cheyenne 10 days ago, and asked the kind of questions that told you immediately he already knew most of the answers, had gone through the key documents, and said without elaborating that the federal case was solid. She got up anyway. She went to the study. She read through the summary one more time. Ethan found her there at 5:30. He didn't say anything for a moment. He stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and looked at her sitting at the desk in the lamplight with her notes spread around her, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to remove. "You already know it," he said. "I know," she said. "Then come away from the desk." She looked at him. Abigail. Her name and his voice had stopped being unfamiliar 2 weeks ago. "Come away from the desk and drink your coffee." She set down the summary. She took the cup he offered. They sat her at the desk, him in Lily's chair, and they drank their coffee in the early dark, and neither of them spoke, and it was one of the most comfortable silences she had ever sat inside. "Are you afraid?" he asked finally. "No," she said. And then honestly, "I'm afraid of being wrong about something I don't know I'm wrong about. That's different from being afraid." "What would you be wrong about?" "If I've misread one of the statutes. If the certified copy of the survey arrives with a discrepancy I haven't accounted for. If the judge has a prior relationship with anyone in the opposing chain." She paused. "Briggs has checked all of those things, but I've checked them too, and he's checked my checking, and at some point you've been as careful gets, and you simply have to stand in front of the room and say what you know." Ethan turned his cup in his hands. "I've never been good at that," he said, "standing in front of a room." "You don't have to say much today," she said. "Briggs speaks. I speak if called. You answer questions directly and honestly, and you don't volunteer anything beyond what's asked. You've told me that 4 times. Because the 4th time is when it tends to stick." He looked at her over the rim of his cup, and there it was again, that thing adjacent to a smile that had been appearing more frequently in the past 3 weeks. The expression of a man relearning what it felt like to find something genuinely amusing. "You're a very difficult woman," he said. "You're a very stubborn man," she said. "We manage." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "After today." "Yes, after today, regardless of how it goes, I want to talk to you about what happens next. Not the ranch, not the legal situation." He looked at the desk. "Us." The word sat between them, simple and enormous. "All right," she said. "Not now," he said. "After." "After," she agreed. They heard Lily's feet on the stairs, that slightly uneven, quick pattern, and then she appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair braided tightly, wearing her best dress with the collar pressed flat. "I'm coming," she announced. Ethan opened his mouth. "Don't," Lily said before he could speak. "I'm 9, not an infant. I know what's happening today, and I'm coming." Ethan closed his mouth. He looked at Abigail. "She has her father's stubbornness," Abigail said. "She has her mother's certainty," he said. It was said quietly, and it was the most open thing she had heard him say about Eleanor in the entire time she'd been here, and Lily heard it too. She went very still for a second. Then she straightened the collar of her dress and went to eat her breakfast. The county courthouse in Red Creek was a 2-story stone building that served as the administrative center for everything legal and governmental in the valley. Abigail had been inside it twice, once to speak with Theodore Ashe in the clerk's office, once with Briggs to review the injunction filing. She knew where everything was. What she had not seen before was the room full of people. Half the valley appeared to have come. Ranchers she recognized from the names in the ledgers. Tom Haggerty, in his good coat sitting in the second row with his hat on his knee. The McIntoshes who had sold their property 6 months ago and had apparently been following the case development through Gerald Potts, who sat beside them. Hands from 3 different ranches. The woman from the general store. The school teacher. And at the back of the room standing, rather than sitting, 2 men in eastern coats who had the bearing of people accustomed to watching proceedings from a distance. Kellerman's colleagues from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Abigail assumed. Briggs was already at the front table when they arrived. He looked at the room, looked at Abigail, and gave a single nod that meant, "Good, this is useful." Public attention was a form of evidence of its own kind. Men who operate in shadow do not perform well under collective observation. The opposing counsel was a lawyer named Whitfield from Laramie. Well-dressed, professionally composed, carrying a leather case that matched his coat, in a way that suggested more attention to presentation than Briggs's battered case ever would. He looked at Abigail when she sat down at Briggs's table, and his gaze lingered a moment longer than professional courtesy required. She looked back steadily until he looked away. The judge was a man named Caldwell, 65. Iron-haired, with the specific economy of movement of a man who has presided over enough proceedings to have burned away everything unnecessary. He came in, sat, looked at the room without comment on its fullness, and said, "We're here on the matter of Brooks versus Western Territorial Development regarding a disputed boundary notation in the 1886 deed record and associated fraud allegations. Mr. Briggs." Briggs stood. He spoke for 40 minutes. Abigail had heard him rehearse it twice and had read the written version 4 times, but hearing it in the room with the assembled ranchers and the Eastern lawyers, and Ethan sitting motionless beside her, and Lily at the far end of the bench with her hands folded in her lap, it landed differently than it had on paper or in rehearsal. Briggs was not a dramatic man. He did not perform. He simply assembled the truth in front of the judge piece by documented piece, with the confidence of a man who knows that the truth correctly organized does not require embellishment. The boundary alteration. The original survey against the altered deed record. The 40-foot discrepancy. Renner's filing stamp. The timeline placing the alteration within 2 months of Western Territorial Development's formation. The subsequent acquisition of surrounding properties. The coordinated financial pressure. The tax manipulation. The contract exploitation. The escalating intimidation. The poisoned cattle, the fire. The purchase offer with its handwritten threat. The Denver operative who had approached neighboring ranchers for competitive intelligence, one piece at a time. Each one documented. Each document admitted as evidence before he moved to the next. At the 15-minute mark, Judge Caldwell had stopped taking notes and was simply listening. At the 30-minute mark, Whitfield made 2 objections. Both were overruled. After the second one, he stopped objecting. At 40 minutes, Briggs said, "Your Honor, the evidence establishes beyond reasonable evidentiary standard that the boundary notation in the 1886 deed record was willfully altered by the office of the former county tax assessor, Clifford Renner, in coordination with the financial and operational strategy of Western Territorial Development and its parent interests, with the specific intent of depriving the Brooks Ranch of legal ownership of a natural water source it has held and maintained for 30 years. We request that the altered notation be formally nullified, the original survey boundary be certified as the legal property line, and the preliminary spring claim filed by Western Territorial Development be dismissed with prejudice." He sat down. The room was completely quiet. Judge Caldwell looked at Whitfield. "Counsel." Whitfield stood. He spoke for 12 minutes. He used careful language and made reasonable-sounding procedural arguments and challenged the chain of custody on 2 documents and suggested that the boundary discrepancy might be attributable to surveying error rather than deliberate alteration. Abigail had anticipated every point. She had written Briggs's responses to all of them 3 days ago. She watched Briggs make notes as Whitfield spoke and recognized in the small check marks he was placing beside her pre-written responses that he was confirming she had covered the ground correctly. He had. When Whitfield sat down, Caldwell looked at the evidence table. "I'd like to hear from the individual who compiled this documentation," he said. "Miss Carter." She stood. She had testified before, not in court exactly, but in front of a company board, which was close enough that the principle was the same. She had learned then that clarity is more persuasive than force, and that the most powerful thing a witness can do is speak as though the truth is simply the truth and requires no advocacy. "Miss Carter," Caldwell said, "the document chain connecting the Renner office alteration to the formation of Western Territorial Development, walk me through it." She walked him through it, precisely sequentially, without reference to her notes, because she didn't need them. The dates, the filing sequences, the financial records that showed the pattern of pressure coordinated with the property acquisitions, the telegram confirming the spring claim was filed within days of the financial evidence of her work becoming visible to anyone watching the ranch. Caldwell asked 4 questions. She answered all 4 without hesitation. He looked at her for a moment after the 4th answer. "You've been on the Brooks property for how long?" he said. "Just under 4 weeks, Your Honor." "You compiled this documentation in 4 weeks." "The raw records existed," she said. "I organized them." He looked at the evidence table again. Then he looked at Whitfield. "Counsel, your client's spring claim, was it filed before or after Miss Carter's arrival on the Brooks property?" A pause. "After, Your Honor." "How long after?" Another pause. "Longer." "6 days," Whitfield said. Caldwell nodded. He made a note. He looked at the room. "The court will take a 30-minute recess," he said. The 30 minutes were the longest Abigail had spent since the 3 days on the train platform. She sat at the table and drank the water Briggs poured for her and listened to the room behind her find its voice in a low, sustained murmur. Ethan sat beside her and did not speak. Lily appeared from the gallery bench and sat on Abigail's other side and put her hand over Abigail's hand on the table and left it there. Abigail turned her hand over and held on. Briggs leaned close. "Caldwell's note at the end," he said quietly. That was the moment. "He's already decided." "Don't say that," she said. "Not yet." "I've been in front of Caldwell 11 times, Briggs said. "I know what that note means." She didn't answer. She held Lily's hand and waited. Caldwell came back in at 32 minutes. He sat. He looked at his papers for a moment, then at the room. "In the matter of the boundary dispute," he said, "this court finds the 1886 deed record notation inconsistent with the original certified survey by a margin that is not attributable to error. The evidence of willful alteration is compelling. The original survey boundary is hereby certified as the legal property line. The spring located on the east boundary of the Brooks Ranch property is confirmed as within the legal boundaries of that property and under its ownership." He paused. "The preliminary spring claim filed by Western Territorial Development is dismissed with prejudice. The injunction is made permanent pending the outcome of the associated fraud investigation." He looked at Whitfield. "Counsel, your client's position in the associated fraud investigation is a matter for the territorial and federal courts. This court's findings today will be forwarded to those proceedings as relevant evidentiary documentation." He closed his folder. Court adjourned. The room behind Abigail did not erupt. It exhaled. A long collective release of breath, and then voices beginning, and then Tom Haggerty's voice distinctly audible saying something short and emphatic that she chose not to fully process, and the sound of men standing and hats coming off, and the particular murmur of a community that has seen something it needed to see. Lily's hand tightened on hers. Abigail looked at Ethan. His face was, she would think about this later, and still struggle to find the right word for it. Not triumphant. Not relieved exactly, though relief was part of it. Something quieter and more complete than either of those things. The face of a man who has been fighting for a very long time and has just been told that the fighting was worth it. He looked at her. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. "All of us, including the 9-year-old who kept records when no one told her to." They both looked at Lily, who was looking at her lap with an expression of fierce, controlled emotion that was unmistakably her father's expression on a smaller face. "Lily," Ethan said quietly. She looked up. He reached over Abigail and pulled his daughter into his arms and held her there in the middle of the courthouse, with the room full of people around them, and Lily held on with both arms and her face against his shoulder, and Abigail sat between them and felt the warmth of them on either side and thought this is what I came here for without knowing it. Briggs appeared at her shoulder. He shook her hand with both of his. "Exceptional work," he said. "Thank you for moving fast," she said. "Thank you for having it organized when I arrived." He glanced at Ethan. "He's a good man." "I know," she said. "Don't let him talk you out of being paid fairly," Briggs said. "He'll try to minimize it. He thinks admitting what something is worth implies he couldn't have managed without it." She looked at him. "He couldn't have." "No," Briggs agreed. "He couldn't. Tell him so." He picked up his case. "I'll be in touch about the federal proceedings. Kellerman will want you to be available if needed." "I'll be here," she said. He nodded and moved toward the back of the room, and Tom Haggerty intercepted him immediately, and the room folded around its own conversations and its own relief, and Abigail stayed sitting at the table and let it happen around her. After a while, the room began to empty. The ranchers filed out, stopping to shake Ethan's hand as they passed Tom Haggerty last, who held Ethan's hand in both of his and didn't say anything, because sometimes the thing between two men who have been through something together doesn't need saying. The U.S. Attorney's men left without speaking to anyone, which was its own kind of statement. Lily went to find Martha, who had come along and spent the entire hearing sitting ramrod straight in the gallery, as though her posture alone could influence the verdict. And then it was just the two of them. Ethan and Abigail in the emptying courthouse, with the morning light coming through the high windows and the sound of Red Creek going about its Tuesday business outside. "You said after," she said. He turned from where he'd been looking at the door the last of the ranchers had gone through. "Yes," he said. "This is after." He looked at her for a long moment. He came to the table and sat beside her, not across from her beside her, the way Lily had sat. He set his hat on the table. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "I can't tell you the ranch won't have hard years, because it will. I can't tell you this valley is finished with its difficulties, because it isn't. I can't tell you I'm an easy man, because Hank will tell you in about 30 seconds that I am not." She waited. "What I can promise it," he said, "is that you will never wait alone on a platform for someone who doesn't come." He held her gaze with everything unguarded, everything accounted, everything present. "I will always come, whatever it costs and however far." She thought about the crumpled letter on the tracks. She thought about the 3 days and the $41 and the borrowed tin plate of beans and the life she had packed into one trunk and one hat box and offered to the world, which had handed it back to her on a Wyoming platform and told her to start again. She thought about a basket of eggs and 6 words spoken by a 9-year-old who saw something her father couldn't see yet. She thought about page 42 and page 67, and the lamp burning low and the sound of a laugh she had heard from across the room, and thought that's what this place should sound like. "Yes," she said, simply, completely. He took her hand. He held it the way you hold something you intend to keep. They sat there in the quiet courthouse for a moment longer, and then they went home. The wedding was small. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday, when the first real snow had just begun to settle on the mountains, and the air had the cold clarity of a new beginning. Neighbors filled the yard. Tom Haggerty and his wife, the McIntoshes Gerald and Ada Potts, Cal Whitmore, with his hat cleaned and pressed. Hank and Billy and Ira and the other hands stood in a line with their best shirts on and their hats in their hands. Samuel Briggs came from Cheyenne on the Friday train. Martha cried from the moment the ceremony began and denied it afterward with complete conviction. Lily stood beside Abigail the entire time. She did not carry flowers or wear a ribbon or do any of the ceremonial things that a child in that position might have been coached to do. She simply stood there, small and straight, with her hands at her sides and her chin up, present in the complete and total way that she did everything. When the minister said the final words and Ethan took Abigail's hand, Lily looked up at both of them with those direct blue eyes, and what was in them was not the careful, composed expression she wore when she was managing herself, and it was not the fierce, controlled emotion of the courthouse. It was simply joy. Uncomplicated, unguarded, absolute. The kind of joy a child has when the thing they hoped for most turns out to be exactly as good as they believed it would be. Years passed. The Brooks Ranch grew not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, the way things grow when they are properly tended by people who understand what they have. Abigail modernized the financial systems, brought the contracts into order, established relationships with fair buyers through the ranchers' cooperative, and managed the books with the same precision she had brought to that first lamp-lit night in the study. Ethan worked the land and the cattle, and began quietly and without announcement to take on younger ranchers who needed guidance, teaching them the things his own father had taught him about reading weather and reading cattle and reading the land itself. The spring on the east boundary ran clean and constant, the way it had always run, feeding the creek that fed the downstream properties, the way it had always done, because some things are simply where they belong, and no amount of legal maneuvering can change the fundamental fact of their presence. Clifford Renner was found in Nebraska 18 months after he fled Red Creek and faced territorial fraud charges that consumed the better part of 2 years in the courts. He was not a free man at the end of them. Arthur Crane's Western operations were dismantled by the federal investigation, and Crane himself paid a settlement that did not constitute an admission of guilt, but that everyone understood for exactly what it was. Harlan Goss retired from cattle brokering the spring after the hearing, and no one was surprised. Lily Brooks grew up at the same pace, and with the same deliberate quality she had brought to everything since the age of 6. She finished school at the top of her class, went east for 2 years of formal accounting education, and came back to Red Creek with a certificate and opinions about cattle futures that turned out to be consistently correct. By the time she was 22, she was managing the expanded Brooks operation with a precision that made buyers from 3 territories request her specifically by name. She was her mother's warmth and her father's stubbornness and Abigail's clarity, and she moved through the world knowing exactly who she was and where she came from. She never forgot that she had walked 4 miles with a basket of eggs and asked a stranger a question that changed everything. She told the story herself sometimes to people who asked how the Brooks Ranch had survived when so many others hadn't. She told it plainly and without embellishment, the way she had learned to tell things from watching Abigail. The platform, the 3 days, the eggs, the 6 words. The woman from Ohio who had arrived with nothing but $41 and the wrong life and had built the right one from the materials at hand. Visitors would ask Abigail directly sometimes. On the occasions when the story reached them by some route and they found themselves at the Brooks Ranch table and felt bold enough to ask her, "How did you end up here of all places in this life?" she would set down whatever she was holding and she would smile. Not the careful smile of a woman managing a conversation. The real one, the one that reached her eyes and changed her whole face. The one that Ethan had learned in the first year of their marriage meant she was fully present and fully content and not managing anything at all. "I thought my life was over," she said. "I threw a letter onto the train tracks and I thought this is the end of everything I planned." She paused the way she always paused at this part. "But the train that never arrives," she said, "leads you to the family you were truly meant to find." And that was true. And that was enough. And it was in every way that counted the beginning of everything.